Hi, I'm Doris Sumner, and I'm sending this video because I'm trying to plead to women who have been in the National Guard, specifically the Vermont National Guard. I spent 36 years of my life in the military and 33 right at Camp Johnson in the Vermont National Guard. In the last 13 years, a lot of you know, I was the state equal employment manager, and all of the cases that I dealt with as I was the manager for equal opportunity were sexual harassment or they based from some sort of gender discrimination. And although the regulations and the processes are fair, there was a very biased response oftentimes when women did bring a situation forward which they felt like they were absolutely being sexually harassed or discriminated against based on their sex. And a lot of times it may have been miscommunication or unintentional, but the response when it was brought forward was even more biased. It was, directly biased. I'd say a lot of times it's due to ego, but I think a lot of times because people don't like being questioned on their intent, and their intent may not have absolutely been intentionally biased or because you're a woman. I hear so many people say, I don't care if you're male or female, I don't care the color of your skin, I care about your competency, but then in the next breath say something that's very sexist and very even racist or biased against somebody. And it's harmful. And the problem with allowing sexist comments or sexist attitudes in an organization is because people who are prone to act out in a very negative, hurtful manner, sexually assault or actually oppress somebody's talent based on their sex, are looking for those sort of conditions, those sort of cultures to hide themselves, camouflage themselves in, so they don't stand out when they say such crash remarks or they start objectifying someone and talking bad about them. There's nobody that's going to say, hey, that's not okay. Because, you're in the military and, if you can't handle the F word or you can't handle the B word or, come on, we're just joking. You should get out of the military, and, everybody's being too sensitive about it. And so we have actual sexual assaults that are happening in our military. And the data supports, that it's everywhere, that 1 in 4 women will be sexually assaulted at some time in their military career. And so I'm asking friends, really people that I have spoken to, people that have entrusted me with these stories, no matter where they land on the spectrum of harm, from a crash remark to sexual assault, and the pain that was endured by the moment and then afterwards, and then the compilation of comments, the compilations of being oppressed, the compilations of why don't you smile, those sort of remarks, or when you talk in a meeting and they act like they don't even hear what you're saying, and then somebody else says it, and all of a sudden it's a great idea. So all of these continue to keep the men in majority. Now, I am not against men. There is a lot of great mentors in the military who really want women to exceed. But the culture itself, because there is 86% men, and oftentimes there's 99% men in a unit, there's just a lot of men in power, that there's a cultural influence to that when you have a majority of a certain group. And a lot of times people don't think of gender as a culture, but we are definitely socialized differently depending on if you're male or female. And although that is changing, there's a curve to changing that. It's very, very entrenched in our society that we treat girls one way and we treat boys another way, and it is a cultural adaptation. There's different expectations for men than there are boys, and there's data to show that men are favored. Men get higher scores, and especially tall, handsome men are just automatically given the benefit of the doubt. They must be smart and competent because they look really smart and competent. And so this is causing a lot of women to just opt out of the military, not even be interested in joining, for one thing. But once they get in, it's sink or swim. So, some women obviously are great competitors, and they're like, I can do this, and they're swimming upstream, and they're making the cuts, and they're getting promoted, and they're very successful, and they're adapting to the current. And so we do have a lot of great successful women. But I would venture that most women that have achieved rank and success know that they had great mentors and that they worked doubly hard to overcome the bias and the cultural issues that they experienced in the military. And so I was in the job for 13 years, and I was a collector of all of these pain, all of the impact that was happening based on this culture. Now, many of you have your own personal story, your own personal pain or humiliation or annoyance of the culture, but you're like, hey, I just deal with it. I got over it. I got my rank. I got out. I got my retirement. Well, it's still happening. There's still great, young, competitive, strong, competent women who are joining the military saying, I can do this. And then they get in there, and after a few years of swimming upstream, they see that their brother, who they might really like and is a great guy who respects them, they're not swimming, as hard as the woman is swimming. And I know that great men that achieve rank and achieve success have to swim. They have to be competent. But there are many who don't have to swim as hard because of their maturity status, because of that bias that, he's got to be great. And so what I'm trying to do, what I have been trying to do for the last decade, is really connect that bias, that gender bias, which is supported by all kinds of reports and status reports in the military, is connect that to the sexual assault and sexual harassment phenomenon that happens in the military. And, here we are trying to stop sexual assault, stop sexual harassment, but we're not talking about the gender bias, and we're not talking about how do we equalize the genders so that there is not this status gap between masculine and feminine. And the way that I see that is through diversity. And in the Vermont Guard, we never really had a chief diversity officer. So we put together a diversity council, under my leadership as a state equal employment manager. And we had special emphasis program managers, and we had diversity events, and we had diversity boards and newsletters. And really, the whole purpose of that was so that the majority, which is white men, would understand that bias gap that people of underrepresented groups were experiencing, and then they would be more inclined to be aware of their bias. But it really just I could never get that truck up over the hill. And I had great mentors, I had great supporters, I had great colonels that I worked for that listened to me and believed me. I got a lot of awards for my work, for my endurance to do this. But now I'm retired, and I've been out for a year, and I've been working with Representative Gene O'Sullivan on a bill that would require, at least in Vermont National Guard, but I would absolutely believe it should go national. But a long time ago, they did a great job of ruining affirmative action because people were implementing it. White males that were in charge were implementing it incorrectly and unfairly, just putting females or minorities in charge that were not qualified, or even if they were qualified, there was all of that, you only got the job because you were a female, or you only got the job because you were a minority, and then setting them up to fail. So they took out the affirmative action as a requirement, and they were like, let's just have a diversity program, and let's just take a look at the demographics and see if there is an increase in the representation of women and minorities. And the fact is there has not been headway. And I have focused mostly on gender because gender crosses all forms of diversity to include race, religion, ethnicity. But I know that the women demographics have been flatlined for decades, and especially in command positions. So although we have seen women admirals, we've seen women generals, women sergeant majors, they come and they go. There's not an increase of representation in that power core structure. And it is due to the sexist culture, the culture that we just allow people to talk like that, and we allow that bias to happen without any oversight. There's no quota system. Oh, you have to have a certain amount of women and minorities, so then you look like a fair organization. And so the bill that I've been introduced through Jane O'Sullivan, wrote the bill, but I've helped her, is we need oversight. We need oversight on the growth of women in the Vermont National Guard so that we have the voice of the women culture, what it's like for women in the Guard. And a chief diversity officer in Vermont Small Guard would provide the Adjutant General, General Knight, a person who could solicit all the data, take a look at the trends, as I did when I was in the job, and provide recommendations to actually make headway on the increase of women in the organization. And I believe that General Knight feels like he has some great ideas and he's headed that way. But experience has shown the military that it's going to take bold action and accountability to make headway, because we work on what we measure. And it is so hard, in my experience, it's been so hard for men to be humbled that we need more women on the team. And the bill is really for the governor to appoint a chief diversity officer who would work to take a look at the National Guard culture, looking at climate assessments, looking at demographics, and looking at the programs and policies in place to see that they lend themselves to improving the climate, the sexist climate, so that women feel more embraced and included, and that the men in the military are more aware, because most of it, like I said, is unintentional. These words and comments and gestures are unintentional, but they are still harmful. They're still making women feel like the interlopers, like we really don't belong, we're just there. And I know that's not for everybody, because there are some teams, there's some units that that women are so proud to be a part of, and they have this brotherly admiration for the team that they're on. So I know it's not for everybody, but the data shows that it's hurting some, and when it hurts some, it hurts us all. And so unless we have this bill in place to really hold General Knight and the Vermont National Guard to make some headway, the culture is not going to change, because the culture only change by those that are in power. The people who don't have the power agitate those in power and say, we want change. And then those in power make the change. So I'm asking you, as my sister in arms, to be real about the culture that you experience in an organization where we were underrepresented, and the male culture was definitely dominant. So we assimilated to the dominant culture in order to be successful. I was in the military for 22 years before I became the EO officer. I was sexually assaulted by my first company commander. It was a consensual date that I went on, but he definitely took advantage of a 18-year-old Vermont girl that had never been out, and I just put that in my backpack and carried on. I was ashamed of it, and my brothers, I was in a truck driving unit, and my brothers who knew about it saying, oh, he's ETSing, so he totally took advantage of you. But back then, it wasn't like we reported it. I just put it in my backpack and I carried on. And then I experienced sexual harassment, I experienced bias, but I put it in my backpack. I rolled up my sleeves and I dug in, and I did my 3 years active duty, and I joined the Guard. And most of the time I did not see or feel like I was being oppressed or discriminated against or excluded because of my sex. It really wasn't until I became the EO officer and, this privilege that I had never felt rejected based on my gender. But then when I had clients come to me and say, I'm not being included or I'm being sexually harassed, and listening to their experience and then trying to advocate a fair process for them and having them not made whole, okay? Not because one particular sexist man hated females in the military, but it's just a cultural response that they cannot connect with or they would defend in a way coming from their lens. So this is what I feel like would fix a lot of those problems so that women who are, badass, confident, and really want to be a soldier and a warrior join the military. And you really don't feel it until you start competing for leadership, until you are trying to implore the power that the military, the great military, provides, because you can be a squad leader or a platoon leader or a company commander at such a young age and be in charge of so much. And it's a great feeling to contribute to the whole and to be part of something bigger than yourself. But when you're blocked from doing that, from being all that you can be, it's painful. And again, it's just incremental. So it's little bit by little bit by little bit, and then you become aware of it. And then you're like, well, what do I do with it? And oftentimes women just get out. They underperform or they just get out and they just lean back and say, you know what, it's the guy's game. And we lose, our entire organization loses so much. So until we have some sort of accountability, it's just going to continue. And again, those really sick perpetrators really are looking for those sort of organizations to camouflage themselves in. And I think one sexual assault is one too many, and it's unneeded. And so the more that we have of balance, respect for gender, for masculine and feminine traits, and the more women that we have in the power core, it's going to change the culture, and we can shed the light on those sort of people that they don't belong in this organization. And it's not okay to objectify people. It's not okay to say sexist jokes because it demeans our profession. It lowers our professionalism. And it's ineffective. We don't need it. We don't need to be nasty to be effective warriors and to fight when we need to fight and to get the job done. The military is going to continue to get funded because we need the military. It's not going to go bankrupt. But any organization that would allow the rate and the prevalence of sexual harassment and sexual assault for 25, 30 years would be out of business. But we keep remaining in business despite this dysfunctional prevalence of sexism that we have. And so I'll start with the National Guard in Vermont, but I would like the entire military to adopt really being accountable for the increase of women in command position so we can change the cultural responses to these sort of offenses. And then it would be better for everybody. And so if you're watching this video, I'm sending it to you because I want you to consider not just your experience of bias or sexism or sexual assault and that personal pain and humiliation, but the totality of it all, because I was there for 13 years, and I'm sure some of you have heard some horrible stories, and it's continuing. So I just can't imagine my granddaughter joining and experiencing that, and I see her with her confidence and all that she wants to do and her self-esteem, and to think of that being crashed, being smashed, on her way to wanting to be a great commander or a great sergeant major. It just infuriates me. And so there's a lot of work that's been done on gender equality and for men and women to see men and women as human beings instead of one or the other. But we still have stereotypes, entrenched stereotypes and expectations around gender. And it just keeps being handed down until we boldly change the culture. So I would really appreciate your comments when I put things out about this bill and the cultural change needed, because there needs to be, I keep hearing, well, everybody seems pretty happy with the way it is, and it's just like, I don't know, I just feel like we need to really say that it's not okay. We need to agitate the leadership that a cultural change is needed if we're going to recruit, retain, and promote women into our military to be equal warriors of equal status, equally worthy to accomplish whatever the mission should be, whether it's in feeding the troops or supplying the troops or on the front lines, making headway against the enemy. All of it is so important to our overall national security. So diversity, accountability, the bill is H401, submitted by Representative Jean O'Sullivan to the House Committee General at the Vermont State Legislature. And so if you would email Jean O'Sullivan, let her know that you support the bill for the Adjutant General to have a Chief Diversity Officer, and that annually they report the demographics of women in command positions and what they're doing to increase women in command positions. I would sincerely appreciate it, and thank you for watching this video.